Hey guys, welcome back to Project Cummins. Today what I'm going to be showing you how to do is a valve adjustment on our 2003 24 valve. Now, if you look into your service manual, it'll probably tell you that 135,000 miles should be your first valve adjustment. I don't really agree with that. But if you go and ask a mechanic at the Cummins shop, they're going to tell you 50,000 miles. I don't really agree with that either. I would think that the 100,000 mile range should be pretty decent, anywhere between 80 and 100,000 miles. First thing you want to make sure you do is let the truck sit overnight and get cold. Or, if you're in a bit of a hurry, make sure that the coolant temperature is below 140 degrees. And don't forget your eyeglasses, because we're going to have to get under the truck to find top dead center, and you don't want anything to come back into your eyes. That could hurt like hell. So let's jump into this and I'll show you how it's done. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and remove your terminals off the battery and set them out of the way so they don't make contact while you're working. I went ahead and removed the batteries altogether. I don't want anyone coming in here and try and play a practical joke on me while I have the valve cover off. The injector head studs will have 90 volts or more at any point in time to them. You know, people think they're funny. I don't want any accidents. Next thing I'm going to do is take out the air filter box so that I can have more access. I got a 10 millimeter socket. I'm going to take out this bolt and loosen up this breeze clamp, and this will come right out. Don't forget to set the nut you took off back on the stud. That way you won't lose it. Next, we're going to have to find a socket to fit on the nut on the alternator so that we can rotate the engine for top dead center. I got a 24 millimeter socket, and it fits just fine. Once we got the socket and wrench on, we're going to go ahead and slowly twist counterclockwise to get the crankshaft pulley turning. You don't want to go too fast because the compression of the engine might slip you up and kick back, and that can hurt. Now we're going to have to get under the engine and find the top dead center mark. It's stamped into the pulley, so you're going to have to find it. If yours is rusty like mine, you're going to have to do a little bit of cleaning to find it. I went ahead and marked it with a bright piece of tape right on the edge so that it's clearly visible from the top. Now rotate the alternator until you see that green piece of tape come to the top. I know it's a little hard to see, but that's the whole point of the green tape, is to make it extremely visible. So now that it's at top dead center, we can move on. Next, you're going to want to remove the oil fill cap, and you're going to want to remove the 4 bolts that hold down the cover using a 10 millimeter socket. Once the bolts are removed, you want to go ahead and get your wires out of the way and lift the cover straight up and out towards the front. You might want to go ahead and put your cover back. Once your cover is out, you want to go ahead and remove these 2 breather hoses. It might take a little bit of a tug, but they'll come out. Don't use a tool because you could snap them. Just get them out of the way. Once you have the breather hoses off, you want to take your 10 millimeter socket again and remove 6 bolts that hold down this cover. 2 are here, 2 are here, and 2 are just beyond the camera's view. Now once you loosen up the bolts, you can leave them in the cover as you take it out. But if you take the bolts all the way out, keep in mind these bolts have little O-rings on them, and make sure you don't lose them and make sure they're not damaged. Okay, so this is a prime example about what I was talking about with inspecting your O-rings. With this O-ring, it's completely busted. So this is going to have to be replaced before I put this back in and tighten it down. But for now, I'm going to leave it within the cover as I take it out. So now all your bolts are loosened up, and I went ahead and take out the back two and set them aside. I'm going to put them back in the cover as I take this out. When you're taking this out, you can go ahead and grab onto the cover here and just pull straight up and then out towards the front. Whatever you do, do not use a tool like a screwdriver to try and wedge in between the cracks and pry up, because this could damage your gasket. Just give it a good yank up and pull straight out. So now that we have the valve cover off, we can go ahead and identify our different rockers. You'll notice that there's two different rockers. There's a short arm rocker and there's a long arm rocker. The short arm rocker is your intake. The long arm rocker is your exhaust. Now when checking the valve lash for your rockers, you want the intake to be between 0.006 and 0.015. As long as it falls within those standards, no adjustment is needed. On the other hand, if it does not fall within those standards, you have to send it to 0.010, which is 10 thousandths. So let's go ahead and get out our feeler gauges here. And we'll go ahead and start with, alright. And also, when starting to do this, you'll know if you are correct on your cylinder or not, because there will be just that slight little play there. See how there's a slight little play? You can hear it clicking back and forth. Whereas if you go to one like this, no play at all. So that's not one you're going to be doing. If you would go and try and move this and there was no play whatsoever, you need to go and turn the crank once again 360 degrees back to top dead center. Okay, so let's go ahead and check our clearances, and we can do 1, 2, and 4 intake and see just where we're at. If it will not fit, do not force it. If it's really sloppy, you need to check on the other side of the spectrum, make sure it's right. So for the exhaust, which is the longer arm rocker, you want to get out your feeler gauge at 0.015 and just do the same thing. Move it back and forth. You want to make sure it's not too tight, it's not too loose. Okay, so the intakes 1, 2, and 4 all check out. They're in with spec. The exhaust 1, 3, and 5 also fall within spec, so they're okay. Just like before, we're going to go and start at our minimum and see where it starts first. And remember, our maximum for the intake is going to be 0.015. Now, I'm not saying hundreds and thousands because I don't want to confuse anyone. I figured it'd just be easier to say the numbers. So start intake number 3. 1, 2, 3. And this is a little bit easier having feeler gauges that have a slight curve on them. You just want that slight drag. No sloppy play. You shouldn't be able to wiggle it back and forth like this. You just want a slight drag. That's good. Alright, so go ahead and check the rest of your intakes on 3, 5, and 6. That's bottom dead center. And then check your exhaust rocker arms of 2, 4, and 6. And once again, those specs are between 0.015 and 0.030. Now, if you have to adjust, set them to 0.020. Now, one thing to keep in mind, like I said earlier, is you want to do this cold, like I have the engine now. If you have it about 140 degrees or within that range, you want to set the intake rocker arm to 0.008 and set the exhaust to 0.018. That's only if it's hot. If not, it's 0.008. Okay, we got that? Good. Okay, so everything actually checked out on my valve clearance check, and there's no actual need to do any more adjustment. But let's say yours didn't go as well as mine did, and you got a lot of slop and you want to go ahead and adjust them. What you do is get out 9/16 closed wrench and a number 5 Allen key. You would open up this retaining nut or loosen it, then using your Allen key you would turn clockwise to tighten down or push down, and you would turn left to raise up. And the whole time you're doing that, you want to have your feeler gauge in here going back and forth, and you want to tighten it down just to where it's catching. You don't want to tighten it down so much you got to yank it back out of there. You want to just have it so that it's just catching it. As soon as you're done with that, take out the feeler gauge. Using both hands, you want to have your closed wrench on your nut and your number 5 Allen key, and holding the placement of the Allen key in place, you want to go ahead and tighten this one down. You may have to do this a few times and keep checking your clearance because the inner piece wants to move with a retaining nut on the outside. But once you have all that done, just to double check, put your crank back at top dead center, 2 full rotations, and check your clearances again. Just as a little side note here, this is what I was talking about earlier. These are your terminal nuts on your injectors. And this is why I took out the battery, and I don't really want anyone to have any pranks pulled on me, is because with the batteries connected, these could have 90 volts or more at the terminals, and I really don't think you want that shock. This is one of the big reasons I like to do my projects at home rather than taking it to a mechanic. One, I'm going to save money, and 2, unlike the mechanic, I care what it looks like before I put it back in, so I'm going to go ahead and get this clean. Normally I would use simple green degreaser, but since this is actually pretty baked on here, I'm going to go ahead and use my hand cleaner because it has a little bit of grittiness in it, and a light scrubber. So let's get the hot water running and I'll get this cleaned up. A little bit of scrubbing and degreaser and hot water. What do you think? Not too bad. Not the best restoration job I've ever done, but not too bad. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're just checking out the gasket on the cover and making sure that there's no immediate damage or wear, no extreme cracks, anything like that. Usually this gasket can sustain many years of usage, so it's not very common to having to replace it, but if need be, do replace it. Now, there shouldn't have been a spring on this valve cover, and it's not on the engine still, so whoever had this off last, well, misplaced it. Now, with this truck pushing 160,000 miles, it's a good idea to have this check done. Now, no adjustment was really needed on this, but that doesn't mean yours doesn't need adjusted. Go ahead and do the check. So now we're going to start putting the covers back on and tightening down the bolts. And for this step, you're going to need a torque wrench. If you haven't checked your torque wrench's adjustments lately, and by that I mean its calibration, stop this video now, go back and watch my DIY torque wrench calibration video before you move on. You don't want to over tighten or under tighten any bolts. As long as you have yours in calibration, we can move forward. Now that the valve adjustment's done, it's time to get your cover back on. And make sure that your gasket is in place and hasn't gone anywhere. Just slip it right back in. Be mindful not to knock any dirt into the engine. Alright, cover's on. Time to get those bolts back in and tighten down. Okay, so we have the bolts back in, and I went ahead and replaced all the O-rings because that one snapped and they all looked like they were getting to the point where they were getting a little bit brittle. So, and don't cheap out on O-rings. O-rings are like, what, 3 to 5 cents a piece? If you're going to change one, why not change the whole set? I mean, you can't tell me you can't afford 30 cents in O-rings. So, but once you have the bolts back in, you want to go ahead and tighten down the bolts to 18 foot-pounds. And even though there's not any recommended way of doing it, like there's no 2 steps to doing it, you don't have to do it to like 8 and then 18. It's not that big of a deal. If you want to do it in a pattern so that it fits down a little bit more snugly, you can. But shit just ain't that serious. Alright, get them all tightened down. So once you got your valve cover back on, your bolts tightened down 18 foot-pounds, put your breather tubes back in. Don't snap them. And then get your plastic valve cover back on, put it on. But as a side note, right here on the side, right below this high pressure fuel line warning, is supposed to be all the stats for your valve lash clearance, but this little amount of sticky shit left tells me someone went ahead and ripped it off. Don't do that. Alright, now put the bolts back in to hold this down, and there's no real recommended torque amount for them because you're just holding down plastic. Who really cares? Of course, don't forget to put your air filter box back on. Take out this little nut that you were saving. Nut back on. Hose back on. Last but not least, go ahead and put your batteries back in and get those tightened down. But before you tighten down the terminals, make sure you get them cleaned up real good. I'm not going to put them back in because as soon as this video is done, I'm going to jump into my next project. So, all in all, I think I had, 2 hours wrapped up into this. And that's mostly because I had to do camera work. But if you had to do an actual adjustment, since I didn't have to, I just did a check. But if you had to do an actual adjustment and everything and make sure you took your time, this really should only take you about 2 hours, if that. The hardest thing is actually just getting all your tools together first. So now with the proper knowledge and getting the right tools in place first, I just helped you save about $150 to $300, probably lessen the noise on your engine, gained a little bit more fuel economy, and overall helped out the performance of the vehicle. So until next time, guys, this is Project Cummins. If you have any questions for me, get a hold of me on YouTube or at projectcummins.com, and I'll see you guys next time.